Welcome to Timeout with Kevin with a very, very, very special guest. It's my guy, Kenney Spigner. He is a coach, a father, a teacher. I mean, he has his own podcast, Kenny and the Coaches. Kenny, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, man. I don't know if I live up to all that billing there. I've watched some of the guests that you've had, and I don't know where I rank on that totem pole. But thanks for the kind words.
Yes, yes, anytime, man. So tell me a little bit about your high school experience and how you grew up.
I grew up in a small town in southern Oklahoma. Tatum's, Oklahoma is where I grew up at. Went to school at Fox. Just like in any small school, played all sports that were available. Played baseball for a little bit, but I wasn't very good at baseball. I didn't like the idea of that little ball flying at me, and I couldn't control that.
Yeah.
Football and basketball and track, that was something you can see those balls coming, or you got to run straight and
Hmm.
turn left.
Yeah.
That was baseball just wasn't my thing. Um, like I said, played football, basketball, ran track, played a little bit of college football, not enough to really brag about it, but we talked about that on our podcast, and that's kind of anyone that's ever been through Tatum's or been through Fox, it's small town, and I mean that's kind of the things you hear about small town Oklahoma. It's true
Yeah.
in those towns. It's a close community. Everybody knows everybody. But that's kind of how I grew up.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you think some of the cons of going to a smaller school? Like, because you always hear the pros, it's community oriented, but what do you think some of the sports challenges are and just and socially as just like a high school, middle school student or whatever? Like what do you think some of the cons are?
Well, I think for people, it's hard for kids at small schools to kind of get out of that small school mentality. We had talked about on the podcast that you did with me that one of the things that I wasn't prepared for whenever I went to college was most of the time your teachers were people that lived in the town.
Yeah.
So I mean, you knew them growing up. So it's that was kind of the biggest challenge, and we kind of talked about that. Was I always had this dream of playing. I actually had the dream of playing pro football, but it was one of those things where I wasn't mentally prepared. I wasn't, you know, probably emotionally, mentally ready for that change from being at a school where I graduated with maybe 20 people to,
That's so
I
crazy.
mean, yeah, yeah, even here, like where I'm at now at Empire, I mean, the classes, I think our senior class this year is 28, and that's been one of the smallest ones we've had in a while. But, to me, that's still kind of small school. But, I like when where you graduated at in Duncan, I'm sure it was a couple hundred,
Yeah, two
So,
twenty
I mean,
five is when I graduated with. Yeah.
yeah, see, and I mean, in my head, I couldn't imagine that, but that's, I think that just that's the biggest challenge is not knowing unless somebody can prepare you for it. I don't know how you can prepare a kid for that. Is just kind of tell them, hey, it's a little bit different world whenever you go from, small town Fox, Oklahoma or Tatum's, Oklahoma to even, like a Lawton where Cameron's at, I mean, it's just a lot more people and a lot more things that you're not used to. So that I would say that's probably the biggest challenge is not not realizing how big the world is outside of your little small town.
Hmm. Yeah, so like what got you interested in coaching? Like what we talked about when I did yours was, my mom coaching. I've always looked at coaches, like they played a big part in why I do it now. What was some of the main reasons why you wanted to coach?
Man, I really, I ask that question a lot to a lot of people. And when I ask that, I don't really know. As they're answering, I'm like, what really got me into coaching? I think it's just the love for the game and the love for whatever sport that I'm in is the love for that. And also the love for seeing kids kind of understand something that maybe it took you a while to understand and you're trying
Yeah,
to get that point across to them. And then when you see
yeah,
that light go off.
yeah,
And plus just, preparing kids for the struggles that you experience in sports, how you can correlate that to what you're going to go through in life.
mm,
I mean, this season we just finished up our season last night. We had some adversity. We started out 4-0, and then we lost 5 straight. And then just kind of seeing last night the way that they kind of put all that stuff behind them. It was something bad that had been happening, and they turned that into something positive to end with. I mean, and that's kind of, I mean, if you look at that, it's kind of like life. You're going to have some good
Right.
points, going to be some good things that happen, and then all of a sudden something bad's going to happen. And how are you going to respond to that? And I think that's a lot of what I'm starting to get as I get older. At first, when I first got into coaching, it was, man, X's and O's. We can do this, we can do
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
It's kind of being robotic with it. And as I've gone along, it's been more about preparing kids for life.
yeah,
And that's something that I wish someone would have told me as a young coach. It's not so much about the wins and the losses. Yes, that stuff is very important, but it's learning how to be a part of a team, how to be a part of struggling and overcoming and things like that. To me, right now, that's the most important thing that you can get across to kids. And I think that's why I enjoy it so much, is because it's something special to see kids overcome and just fight through things, because it's real easy. And that's something that I've noticed going through sports in general. It's hard to find games. If a game starts out and one team is kind of blowing out another team, most of the time those games are going to turn into blowouts. It's very rare, even in pros, to see people have that in them to be like, no, this is not going to happen. We're going to figure out a way to overcome this right now, not wait. We'll fix it next week. We're going to fix it right now. And that's something that I think I look more for that. Like last night, I mean, we got down and then we figured out a way to fight through that. And that's
yeah.
something that I, I hope that these kids realize that they're doing, and
Hmm.
that's something that they can take into in their life whenever they get older.
Right, right, right. So let's get into a little bit about the Kenny and the coaches. What
Okay.
motivated you to start interviewing coaches around like the
Yeah.
local area? Like what got you into that? I think that's a really great idea.
Well, I kind of got to thinking, I can't even remember. I started it back in February of last year of 22. And man, I was just thinking, some of my old coaches that I had, I knew them as far as, they're my coach and I'm their player. And I'm, kind of you're supposed to do what they tell you and you don't really get to know them, one of those things. It was one of those where once I got into coaching and got around those coaches that had coached me, it was kind of like, oh man, that coach, coach such and such is really just a person, you know, he, and that was something that I don't think a lot of former players, current players, and just fans of those teams don't really get to know who those coaches are, because a lot of those guys have some, pretty powerful stories. And that was what the genesis of it was wanting to get wanting people to get to know the coaches of their favorite programs.
Hmm. Yeah, that's awesome because I was looking through it on Spotify and I was like, man, I was like, that's such a cool idea to just get all, because like you said, with podcasts now being so hot, that you only focus on the players, not who's kind of
Yeah.
masterminding the idea behind them. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I think it's just a great idea for coaches to be heard, for coaches to be seen. You know what I mean? And just for them to, be like, hey, he didn't have a left hand. He couldn't catch a football before we started. You know what I mean? Like stuff
Yeah.
like that about these players, like that make them successful. So I think it's great what you're doing, man. I really enjoyed, when I got on yours. You know what I mean? It was such a fun time.
Yeah.
Um, I do want to talk about something that's not hard to talk about, but
Hmm.
I know your boys play sports, and you
Hmm.
coach. How difficult is, because my stepfather was a coach and he is a coach, we always try to figure out how to take away basketball like to like the home life. You know what I mean? So how do you
Hmm.
kind of go through not point it over into like the home life aspect?
Well, it was probably more difficult when they were younger, but teenage boys, even though we live in kind of a small house here on campus, it's like, that saying of, kids just kind of live in their rooms. It kind of is that thing. One of them has a girlfriend, so whenever we're out of practice or not in school, that's where he's at. And the other one, my middle son, he wants to keep talking it whenever we're out of practice. And that's, if anything, that keeps me sharp. But I do try to let them have some time away from sports, because it seems like that's the only time that I really get to talk to them, is when I'm like, hey, what are you doing? Why are what was your thought in this? Just always correcting them instead of praising them for what they've done
Yeah.
good, not just in sports, but just during the day. And I
Mhm.
think that's something, as a parent, as you get older, you kind of realize that stuff is more important. I saw somewhere, probably some of that famous Facebook quotes that are, you can take to fact or whatever, but it was a thing where, you always want to, the last thing you say to your kids at night needs to be something positive and loving. And the last thing you say to them, or when you wake them up in the morning, it needs to be something positive and loving. And that's something that I've really tried to do, because it seemed like there's always something that you're trying to prepare them for life.
Right.
It's like you always, as a dad, I think you want to be more tougher on them and tell them things that they probably don't want to hear, but they need to hear,
Mhm.
as far as being, uh, sending them in the right direction. But whenever it comes to separating sports and home life, I mean, gosh, they're so into sports. It's almost like I don't know what we would talk about until the
Yeah.
summer gets here,
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a good thing. I think if they weren't as into sports as they are, I probably wouldn't be. I probably wouldn't have stayed in coaching. So I mean,
Mhm.
I think that we do a pretty decent job of, whenever we had a bad practice or we had a bad game or something like that, we'll talk about it in practice, but we'll kind of leave it there. So
Right. Right.
I think all of us kind of understand that.
Yeah.
you know
And it is kinda hard, especially when you're in season to get out of that mode, like, "Hey, man, you missed 10, you missed 3 layups today, man." Like, what? Like, you know what I mean? Like, because, like,
yeah.
'cause I know,
Mhm.
like, you wanna, like, push them, but then there's a point to where, like, you have to have that break in between, you know what
Yes.
I mean? And that's what's
Mhm.
hard to kind of, like, navigate toward, like, because even with me, like, I would try not to think about it after games, you know what I mean? I'm like, "Man,
Mhm.
I shoulda had a mismatch here, I shoulda done this," or, like, and you get so, like that's how you get burnt out, I feel like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, and seeing that's, all three of my sons are different. My youngest one he's a sixth grader, so he's just kind of getting
Mm,
into what
yeah,
sports is. But my oldest two, one of them's a senior. That's great. Let's go on to the next thing. He's great. He's been great about letting things go that, you know, could be a bad thing, or he could dwell on it too much. And he just kind of is like, all right, I know I messed up, or hey, I know I did a good thing. I'm gonna move on to what's next. My sophomore son, he's a little bit harder on himself. He was doing kind of like what you said. He would, after a game, and he's kind of slowly getting out of that, but he would be the world's worst at beating himself up. So I knew I wouldn't have to tell him much, because I knew once he made a mistake on the field or on the court, he's beating himself up there, beating himself up out there on the field or on the court. So I know I can just look at him and be like, and just kind of give him a shrug, and he's like, I know, and I know I can leave it at that.
right,
So that's yeah, it is it is kind of difficult, and it is kind of a juggling act. And also, what's kind of a difficult and juggling act is when you're coaching your kids and also coaching other kids as well. I mean, that's where, boy, and I'm sure other coaches, that's something I want to ask a lot of coaches about whenever I'm interviewing them, is how do you separate being a parent and being a parent to your kid, and being a coach to your kid, and being basically a step parent to your other players and a coach to those players too. That's kind of a difficult mesh, and I don't know if I've perfected that yet,
yeah,
or in any way, shape, or form. But that's something that I always want to know about, how other people handle coaching. Because I was talking to a guy, or a coach, a while back, and he had brought up a point. I never really thought about it. He'd coached his kid all the way through school, and he said, "I've never got to see my kid play."
mm,
I got to thinking about that, and I was like, "Well, you're coaching him on the sidelines, but as a coach, you can't watch one kid. You're having to watch everything that's going on out there." And that was something that really kind of hit me. I was like,
that's a
"Yeah,
great
you're
point.
right. Unless I'm watching film the next day, I don't see my kids play." So that's something, I think, and really I try to keep adopting that, because sometimes I do want to kind of hone in on what Nicholas is doing or what Broderick's doing, and like, oh, hey, I need to be watching what's going on up here. So
Yeah.
it's a juggling act, man, and it's a tough one.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great saying. Like, I never even would have thought about that. You know what I mean? Because even like my
Mhm.
sister, like, because I would help coach my mom's team. That's how, when I got started. And I would do
Mhm.
that. I'd be like, man, I was like, let me see if Jocelyn's in short corner. Let me see like if she's posting up good. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
You're like, oh God, I got to worry about four of the girls in what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like it's so easy just to get like locked in. You're like, man, I gotta make sure I'm locked in on like on everybody
It's
else.
difficult.
You know, and
It is difficult.
man, that's a great. I've never. That's great, man. That's something to think about. I never even. You know what I mean? That's crazy.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And even like, oh, during the basketball game when there's less people out there, it's
yeah,
still kind of difficult because I mean both of mine start and play a lot. It's even kind of hard to both of them kind of play down low, so that kind of helps me out a little bit. I can kind of watch what's going on in the post play and kind of keep focused on them. But it is difficult. I don't know what the answer is because I think if you're related to, like you were saying, with your sister or with your own kids, I think it's a parenting, it's just ingrained in a parent to want to watch your kid perform, you know, and you, especially like whenever you see the work that they put in to be good, you want to see the fruits of that, you know. But I mean, and then it's just hard, man. I don't know how to. I think, like you were saying, I mean, you've been in it with your sister. I don't know if it's something that people can understand unless they've been in it. You know, it's
right.
kind of like whenever you hear athletes on ESPN or whatever, they always kind of throw that card out there where I played, so that's kind of the same thing with being a parent and coaching your kid. It's like, you don't understand until you're actually doing it.
Yeah,
You know,
right,
it's kind of
right.
hard. I'm sure a lot of people have been in that spot too, but that's just something, sometimes I tend to overthink things on if I'm doing too much for my kids or if I'm uh, doing too much for other kids, and vice versa. If I'm doing too much for other kids and kind of leaving my kids out of it. So
Mhm.
it's a difficult go between for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. So what is your greatest advice for kids, seniors? I mean, just really anybody. What is some of your greatest advice for student athletes?
Man, I think it's uh, probably just be prepared for what comes after, and that is, if you want to be, if you want to further your career and play college sport, and it's something. Well, I don't know if it's a thing that you can explain to somebody, but be ready to be in love with whatever it is that you do after school, because right now, in high school, whether it's academics or athletics, it's almost like if you don't really love those things, you're still being made to do it. I mean, sports is a little bit different because you can voluntarily play sports, but once you get out on your own, you have to be the one to motivate yourself to go work out whenever you don't want to wake up and go to class whenever you don't want to. And that's something that I wasn't prepared for, and I really hope that I can get that across to my kids, especially because it's a drain on you. And if you're not in love with what you do after school, it's going to be easy to go, nah, okay, I made it to that, but I'm going to go do something else. It's just make sure that you fall in love with whatever it is that you want to do after school.
Yeah, yeah, that's great advice, man. Because even like for me, like we're doing like three workouts today. We had 6 a.m. workouts. We had individuals before or after practice. You can pick one. Then we had practice. So you know what I mean? It's like you do that
Mhm.
every day. You're like, man. Then you still gotta do homework. You still gotta try to have a social life. You still gotta find. You know what I mean? Like
Oh
it's like
yeah.
a very difficult task to manage. And even like at the NAI level, like you know what I mean. Most people think if you don't go
Hmm.
D1, you're not like busy. You know what I mean? That's like a huge
Yeah. Hmm.
misconception. Like we did so much stuff like every single day, and it's challenging. That would probably, I mean, that's great advice. I would just tell people to just be, yeah, you like I said, just be ready. You know what I mean? I'd say you gotta love. the grind. You have to. If you don't, man, like college sports isn't for you, no matter what. Like I ask people from football, track, baseball, whatever, and they say how like the first thing they say is how like much work it is to be great. You know what I mean? It's a lot. It's way different from high school. I tell people during the summer being mid-season shape for that next year. Like be like,
Hmm.
you know what I mean? Like you because you have to. Because like high school was like this stuff I got away with in high school, making a move on somebody doing that it didn't work in college. So I had to refrain and think of something else
Hmm.
to make myself stand out. I was like, I have to be a better 3-point shooter. Like, because like, in high school I could drive, get fouled and ones, whatever. But like in college,
Hmm.
Coach G, he was like, hey man, you really have to shoot the ball. Like, we want you to be a 3-point guy, defense, you know what I mean? But really just be able to catch and shoot because you're not gonna be able to dribble as much as you did in high school. And I was just like, what? Like, man, that's crazy. Like, because you still
Yeah.
think you can do some of the, but like it's a role you have to accept. You know what I mean? So I
Hmm.
think just being smart and being aware of what you can do, you know what I mean, for the next level. Because everybody's not gonna score 20 points a game. Everybody's not gonna be the guy. You have to know your role. So I think that would be my biggest. That's why I tell my kids, like, know your role. You know,
Hmm.
it's
Yeah.
important. Everybody can't be the superstar.
Oh yeah, yeah, and that's another thing too. Is what kind of going along with that superstar stuff. I mean, that stuff that you see on on Saturdays, like SEC football games, how big those crowds are. That is not going to be the case in most in most smaller college schools. It's sometimes it's almost like playing in an open gym. You know
Mm,
what I mean? I mean, there's not a lot of people coming to watch it. So I would bet like whenever you played at Duncan, there were probably bigger crowds at Duncan basketball games than there were in games that you played in college. And that's
mm,
something that a lot of kids I don't think are prepared for. They're looking up in the stands and they're like, hey, it's like 10 people up there watching us play. And that's
yeah.
something that it takes a little bit getting used to. It's almost like, you're playing at the college level, but you're playing people don't come and watch it. That's
Mm,
something that's a little bit of a change too. I don't think kids are prepared for. I
yeah.
remember kind of seeing my first college experience, and that was uh, at UCO. I remember turning around looking at the crowd, and I was like, "What in the world is this, a scrimmage? I thought this was a game." And I mean, it's that's something I don't know. And that was something that back in the '90s, you just think you're playing college football. It's going to be big crowds. You're going to have to go on silent counts, and it's like you're able to hear what everybody's talking about in the stands. There's that
Mm,
few people up there, so that's something I
yeah.
don't know if kids may be more prepared for it now, but back then I was like, this is not what I signed up for.
Right, right.
I kind of
Yeah,
like hearing the crowd.
yeah, because like at Mackey, we had one of the more higher attendances, but I think we would average, I think he said like 250 to 300 people, which I mean, that's
Yeah,
good, but like it's just a small
yeah,
gym. So it's packed in there, but it's just so like everybody's just like, right, everybody's just on each other,
yeah, yeah.
because Duncan's like a
Hmm.
huge gym, Mac, like these places are like huge. And like, I was like, man, we got about the same amount of crowd space at Duncan, you know what I mean? And
Yep.
but I have been to
Hmm.
some gyms where I'm like, man, like it's been, like especially like scrimmages, stuff like that. You would think, people would come out and watch. It'd be like 5, 6, it'd be like the girls' basketball team and
Yeah,
like 20 parents spread out. It's like, man, there's no
yeah,
here. And you have to
yeah.
bring your own energy. That's what Coach G always said. Bring your
Hmm.
own energy because of small crowds. You got to talk. You still have to be, because you can kind of be lethargic if nobody's there. You know what I
Yep.
mean?
Absolutely.
That was one of his biggest things. I really want to ask you, are you more of a like a chill kind of coach, or are you more like a screamer, like disciplinarian? Like what kind of? Because I'm more like, I really don't scream. I'll be like that. Dax.
Yeah.
I'm, hey Dax, like, man, you got to shoot the ball. Like, you can shoot it. You know what I mean? I'll say stuff like that, but I'm never like, ah, like, how are you kind of as a coach?
That's kind of funny you say that. Those actual words is what a kid. We were doing the sixth and seventh grade tournament last week or this week, and that's one of the things the one of the kids said was like, "Man, Coach K's chill. He's like the chillest coach we got." So it's kind of funny you say that. I've always been. I mean, I'm not a very loud person anyway, and man, I can't remember if we talked about this on podcast or not, but I know growing up, I grew up with my two football coaches they were retired from Texas, and they were one of them was my superintendent, or he was the superintendent at Fox, and he just kind of took over as being the head coach, and then
Yeah.
another guy, he was retired, and actually he was an old guy. He was he had died the spring of my senior year. So that, I mean, he was an old guy, but he was as old school as you could get. And they were just, iron led by, iron fists, the haulers, screamers, and not that I minded that, because I was the type of kid, as an athlete, I knew what my focus was. I knew that they were just trying to help me out. But a lot of kids, man, and I don't have a problem with people with coaches that are haulers and screamers and stuff like that. I mean, however it is that you bring your energy is, I think there's pros and cons to both. There's times that I wish I was more, um, I'd get a little bit more mad or whatever, but it's just not in my personality to really just scream at somebody. That's not how I'm made up. I mean, I've always kind of looked at it. If I'm in the business world and I'm working for someone and I mess up, I don't really need I know I messed up, so I know really what I need to do. And if somebody, I know in my head kind of what I need to do. And if somebody tells me something, okay, yeah, that you're right. I'm sorry. I'll fix it. I don't need somebody like right in front of my face yelling at me, screaming at me, telling me I did something wrong. But I mean, to each their own. I've always been chill. I've always been more. If a kid messes up, I'll go up and talk to them. I'll get right beside them, put my arm on them, be like, hey, why'd you do this? And if they continue to do that, then you got to get I've raised my voice a little bit, but I don't think I've ever, unless it's my own. Now that's a whole different story. There's been times that, not necessarily with my oldest one, but my sophomore son. There's been a few times I've kind of did the whole grab the face mask thing, and choice words were said. But that's one of those things. Kind of going back to that parenting thing. But I've always been chill, and I think it's something. Do kids respond to that? Yeah. Do kids respond to people that scream and yell? Yeah. But I think it's whatever it is that you do. That was one thing that I kind of made the mistake on when I first started coaching. I was just like I am now. And my athletic director at the time was like, man, you need to be more vocal and stomp and all that stuff. And I was like, okay, that's what I need to do. So I changed how I was doing it. And it was just like the kids could tell it was not me. And
Yeah.
I didn't feel comfortable doing it. I didn't feel like I was coaching when I was doing that. I just felt like I was just not being me. So I was like, I'm gonna ride with what I do. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm gonna be how I am. If that's not good enough, then so be it.
Right.
But I think that's one thing that people need to do, that coaches do need to do, is just be themselves. However it is, if you're a screamer, and that's fine. If you're more chill, then that's fine too. However it is that kids are getting your message.
Mhm. So, time for the bonus segment. We got about
Oh,
5-10 minutes left. So, if you had to eat dinner with one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
all right. Oh, you there?
Oh, okay.
There we go. There we go. Here it
Okay.
goes.
Okay. So I said, if you had to eat dinner with one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
Ooh, if I had to eat dinner with one person, dead or alive. Oh man, that might take me longer than 5 minutes. That's a good one. Dead or alive. Man, I would like to sit down and have dinner with Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just that dude. I I respect LeBron. He's a great player, but Michael Jordan's mentality is something I would like to just dissect,
Yeah.
because that dude, he was cold blooded, man. I
Yeah.
mean, it didn't matter the situation, how he felt. If he stayed up all night the night before, played 36 holes of golf that day, you're gonna get his best. And he was, I mean, the dude smoked cigars all the time, drank all the time, but he was just at the top of his game every single night,
Mhm.
and that's something I would love to pick his brain on how he did what he did.
Mhm. Yes. My last question, my last bonus question
Mhm.
is, what decade would you want to live in if you could choose?
The 90s. I mean, that's when I was in high school, and to me, that's when the best music was out. The movies are better now, but you know, I still on my phone. I'm still listening to '90s music. I just cannot. I guess I'm kind of getting old. I mean, I've already lost my hair, so
Did you have a flat top?
yeah. Yeah. No, I didn't have flat top. I had curly hair and it was long, man. It was back behind I could reach behind my back and grab it. That's how long it was.
I
So,
feel you.
but yeah, man, I'd say the '90s. That was the great decade.
Yeah, yeah, I feel you. But yeah, tell me where you could where we can find your podcast and anything else you want to say to finish it out.
You can find it's Kenny and the Coaches, Kenney and the Coaches. Um, it is on Spotify. I know that for sure. I think it's on Apple. Basically, you just type it in. If you go to whatever podcast site you get on, just type that in and it should pop up. So, and man, I appreciate. I feel honored to be your guest on here. Like I said, I've looked through your catalog of guests and man, there's some pretty good guests on there, and
Thank you.
I'm
Thank
honored to be in that. You know, you might just kind of fit me somewhere in there in between some famous people, so they might, who's this guy? You know, you
you.
might give me a listen or two. But man, I appreciate it. This is a great thing that you're doing here too, man.
Thank you.
I'm glad that you reached out and wanted to be on mine, and I'm glad that you have me on yours.
Yeah, thank you so much.